hey felek saldın beni cevri cepağa. Hey felek saldın beni cevri cepağa. Derdim bulgaç yığlap deme sen bir vapağa. Derdim bulgaç yığlap deme sen bir vapağa. Derdim bulgaç yığlap deme sen bir vapağa.
Welcome window to China and see you one-on-one. Today I'm so honored to have Miss Lisa C, the author of China Dolls. In your book review, everybody just have a very good comment about your discover women's relationships and romantic love and love of country. Do you agree on that?
Oh yes, well I mean that's been a big part of all of my books, is to really write about women and write about the history of women. You know, we typically learn history in terms of wars and dates and generals and presidents and things like that, but actually I think if you take one step back, who's also there? Women and children and families. And so I try to look at history through the eyes of women because so much of history has not been told by them. And so that's part of it. And I think, you know, obviously it's always nice to have a love story. And then I think that last point about love of country, you know, I've written a lot about the Chinese American experience. I've also written a lot of books that take place completely in China. And I think for all of us, it doesn't matter where we live in the world. We have a love of our home. We also have a love of our homeland.
What do you write about China? Why do you write about
Well,
China?
I'm part Chinese. I know I don't look very Chinese, but I'm part Chinese. My great-great-grandfather came to this country to work on the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. My great-grandfather came and stayed, and he became the kind of godfather, patriarch of Los Angeles Chinatown. He had 4 wives. One of them was Caucasian, you might have guessed. And today in Los Angeles, I have about 400 relatives. There are about a dozen that look like me, the majority still full Chinese, and then this little spectrum in between. So how is it that we identify ourselves? We identify ourselves by the people who are around us. They're our mirror. They're the ones who tell us who we are. And so when I was a little girl growing up, and you know, my family was in Chinatown, and you know, when I looked around me, what I saw was Chinese faces. What I experienced was Chinese culture. And so even though I look like this, you know, they always say to writers, write what you know, and that's really what I know best.
It seems you are really very successful author. Write the book and then about China. I think first of all you have to become a writer. What make you decide to become a writer?
Well, my mother is a writer. My mother's father was a writer. So I always say, you know, it's a good thing they weren't plumbers, because I probably would have ended up a plumber. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know, I think I just kind of followed in the family footsteps of what my mother did and what my mother's father did, my grandfather. I think, but really, if you look at it a little more deeply, you know, I think some of us have a certain kind of a calling to become a writer. I was just here in this area for the National Book Festival, and so you know, there were 100 writers who were brought in from around the country and even around the world. And I think what you often find with writers is that they have something that they really inside that they need to get out, that they want to explain something either to the outside world or to themselves. And I think for me, that's a lot of it. You know, the stories that I write, it's really the emotions, the relationships, what happens to them. It's really a way for me to explore something within myself.
I think it's universal. People have hate, love, and
Exactly.
emotions.
They have families, they have mothers, they have fathers. This is a very particular kind of triangle that we all have experienced. And even if we, for some reason, have lost a parent, you still had one at one time. And even that is a story. And then maybe you're missing a piece of that triangle. So these are the universals, the relationships that we have in our lives with our families, with our friends, with the people that we fall in love with. That happens all around the world, and I think that there are ways that when you tell a story about another group, or another, even takes place in another country, what I hope happens is that my readers will connect to those characters, whether they're real or fictional, and think about, what would I have done if I had been in that situation? Would I have been an honorable person? Would I have, betrayed somebody? Would I have been brave? Would I have been a coward? I mean, all of these choices that we make in our lives in certain situations, that those again are universal.
Yeah, I think put your shoes in that place.
Yes.
That's exactly how you connect with readers. I can see you have been very successful. How many books have you written so far about China?
9.
Oh, 9 books.
Yeah.
What are they?
So the first one was On Gold Mountain, which is a nonfiction book about my family. It covers the first 100 years of my family here in the United States. So from my great-great-grandfather really to my birth, and then it's over. I'm not very interesting. And then the next 3 were a kind of mystery thrillers that take place in contemporary China, right? Really in the 90s, so not so contemporary anymore. Flower Net, The Interior, and Dragon Bones. And then the next one was called Snowflower and the Secret Fan, Peony in Love, Shanghai Girls, Dreams of Joy, and the most recent one is called China Dolls.
I see the book covers. This is really in a traditional Chinese way. I'm curious, do you have any advisors? So how you choose the covers, something like that?
Well, actually, I have often given them the artwork. And a lot of that is from old Shanghai poster girls. So that I'll look for images that I think really fit the book. And then, for example, with China Dolls, even though that book takes place entirely in the United States, it's a really very American story. We found, and the publisher had gone through different tries with the jacket, but none of them were right. And I've always loved this particular image. It's one of 4, a series of 4 calendars that had the 4 seasons. And so they took the central image of that girl who looks very much like the girls in China Dolls, and then they put the Golden Gate Bridge behind her and a little bit of San Francisco cityscape, and it's so it's really a composite that was built out of this central image from an old Shanghai poster girl.
Wow, China Dolls, that's the recent book so you wrote. China Dolls often used in the novels. What do you think the meanings behind this phrase?
Right. Well, China Dolls is actually, for a long time was considered sort of a negative stereotype, right? A negative stereotype of, oh, she's very sexy, she's, kind of Susie Wong kind of thing. And I wanted to sort of go back to the origin of that phrase, or that description. So in the 1930s in this country, there were Chinese American nightclubs that featured performers, wonderful performers, you can see them on YouTube, who were billed as the Chinese Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, the Chinese Frank Sinatra, the Chinese Sally Rand, the Chinese Sophie Tucker, the Chinese Houdini, the Chinese fill in the blank. And these were, really wonderful, wonderful performers. And many of the girls, especially the chorus girls, they would be called a China doll. And this is really, I think, the very origin of that phrase. Mm-hmm. And then even in New York, there was one nightclub called the China Doll. Mm. So the novel actually ends at that real life nightclub. But I also wanted to kind of play with this phrase that had been used as a stereotype and try to look at it from different angles and how somebody might see themselves that way, how somebody might look at someone that way and say, oh, you're just like a little China doll, where it's not that really kind of negative, sexy thing, but more like you look like a little doll. Mm-hmm. And how frail and delicate that makes you.
Yeah,
even that, and adorable, but also fragile. Mm-hmm. And yet I don't see anything that's terribly fragile about these women. They're very, very strong. Yeah. So again, I'm just trying to look at that phrase and look at it from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, I think so, because especially in 1930s
right.
and 1945, as World War II has happened, there's a lot of things going on with them, maybe caused a lot of hardship for their immigration girls.
Yes.
Why is it 3 girls? It's not 2 girls, not more than 3 girls.
Right.
What's the relation?
Actually, so
mixed.
I've written about Best Friends for Life in Snowflower and the Secret Fan, two women. In Shanghai Girls, it's 2 sisters. In Dreams of Joy, a mother and a daughter. And so here's the thing about Friends. We tend to think of 3 like 3 legs on a stool, supposed to be so strong. Mm-hmm. And I think many people will have
Chinese saying, kind of.
Yeah, and many people feel like, oh, 3 is always stronger. But even NASA did a study about how to send people into space, and they discovered that it's always better to send 2 instead of 3, because it doesn't matter if it's men, it doesn't matter if it's women, it doesn't matter if it's a mix. 2 will always gang up on 1. Always, it's inevitable. And so I really wanted to look again at that idea of 3 friends and what happens over many years with 3 friends, and how sometimes these 2 are friends and that one is out, and sometimes these 2 are friends and this one is out, and how that works and why that happens. So it's actually quite challenging to write a novel with 3 main characters, but I think that I got the flow of how a relationship with 3 people can change, and what happens when 2 people have a secret that they don't tell the other one. And just lastly, and again, this is just my experience, but sometimes when there are 3, let's say you and I, we like going to the movies, but that other person doesn't like movies. Mm-hmm. Maybe you and that person, you love music, and that's something that you share. Or maybe you love to cook, or whatever it is. And so we sometimes in that 3, we have these very different things that actually it's not a deliberate thing of we're leaving that person out. It's just our own personal interest.
Mm. Window to China and CU11 has reached out to the hundreds of Chinese community, Asian community, and American community on performance, interview in education, politics, culture, etc. It's a link for all the communities. CU and Judy Wu, the publisher AC Business News, are making joint efforts to promote the program on Newspaper Weekly. Window to China and CU11 is a 30 minutes long English program. It will be available on YouTube, Facebook, Google+, AC Business News by keywords Window to China and CU11.
these are three young women the novel starts in 1938. They've come from three very different backgrounds. They meet at an audition at the Forbidden City nightclub, which was an actual nightclub in San Francisco. And I think that sense that they are so different. Each one is so different. Each one of them has a secret that, one of those secrets is revealed on about page 1 and one comes pretty soon, and there's another one that you don't find out really until the end, the full depth of that secret. I think that, each of those characters is so unique and comes from such a different place in her life, even though they're the same age, even though they're the same height, even though all three of them are dancers, that they have this in common. And in some way that the way that they connect to each other really has to do with the fact that they're kind of alone in the world, and that they're making, and this happens very much in show business, a kind of family out of show business. And this was a difficult time, a very difficult time. It was the end of the Depression, so they were all quite poor. It's just before World War II starts, and so we can read that and know, oh, this is coming, but they don't know it's coming. And that, being a performer for Chinese, even today is seen as a kind of a negative thing. It's not what a good girl would do. But one of the things that these young women have in common is that they are from immigrant families, but they aren't first generation. So many, Grace, for example, grew up in Plain City, Ohio, a very small town where her family's the only Chinese family for, 100 square miles at least. And so what that means when you grow up so separated from your culture, right? And then when they go to San Francisco, now for the first time they're in a place where it has very traditional Chinese culture, where at that time, young women were not supposed to show their arms and legs in public. They were supposed to stay home, learn to embroider, knit, cook, take care of children, become good wives and mothers. And yet these, again, they're sort of breaking the mold by going and doing this one thing that they love more than anything, which is to perform. And so they do have to support each other because no one else will.
I'm curious because they work in the nightclub, probably they faced some difficulty.
Oh, yes.
People just have some discrimination, sexism, something on them. How do they react differently? Three characters.
Well, I think Grace, first of all, is very naive, and she's the youngest, so she's quite naive, and I sometimes think things go kind of over her head a little bit, she's just not really ready for some of those things. So some of it, even when it's happening to her, I don't even think she's quite aware of what people are even saying to her. Then Helen is a little older. I don't want to give too much away about her, but she's at a different place in her life. We could say she's had certainly more kinds of experiences. She's lived in this, very large family compound. She's lived in China. She's had a larger view of the world, and I think she's pretty straightforward in how she sees things and also how she responds to that kind of, I don't think they would have called it that then, but sexism that would have come up if you were a chorus girl. And then the last one is Ruby. Now Ruby, she loves boys and boys love her, and she's like, come on, I'm ready for the party. So all three of them have a sort of different way that they respond to those kinds of things.
How the relationship with their own family shape their character?
Well, that's exactly how I think, that you can see how they are in the world really does come very much from their family experiences. So for Grace, again, being raised so separated from her culture. Here's a girl growing up in this small town, her family, the only Chinese. She doesn't even know how to use chopsticks. That's
typical.
But yeah, the typical. She just doesn't know it, and that really has had a huge impact on her to have been so separated. But on a more personal level, her father has beat her, and she's been teased a lot in school and bullied and things like that. So what she's coming from really has an impact on who she is as a character and how she views the world. And then similarly with Helen, having been raised in a very traditional Chinese family, and her mother has bound feet, and they're living in this very, again, traditional compound where I have had some readers say to me, oh, there couldn't be anything like that here in America. There could never have been anything like that here in America. And actually, couple years back, I got invited to give a talk at Canyon Ranch, the kind of Shishi spa, and at the dinner, there was a woman who sat next to me who had in fact grown up in a compound like that in San Francisco. Her family owned the Fong Fong Bakery. And so many of the details that are in China Dolls about the family compound come from that woman and her own experiences growing up with 30, 40 of her own relatives all in one building and with a central courtyard. And then with Ruby, and I guess we'll just give away this big secret, she's actually Japanese masquerading as Chinese. And so why would she do that? And what kind of an impact does that have on her family? How does that impact how they look at her? And then of course when World War II comes along, what happens to her? There were actually a lot of Japanese Americans who masqueraded as Chinese so that they could work in the nightclubs. What options were open for them? You had at that time the Chitlin circuit for African Americans. They had certain nightclubs that they went to. You had the Borscht Belt where Jewish Americans entertainers, they would go to those nightclubs. You had obviously white nightclubs, and then there was this group of Chinese American nightclubs. And when they would go out on tour and go nightclub to nightclub across the country, what they said was they were going out on the chop suey circuit. So this, if you were Japanese, if you were Hawaiian, if you were Filipino, and you loved to dance, you loved to sing, maybe you were an acrobat or a magician, where could you perform? They didn't have places. So they would change their names so that they would sound Chinese. There was actually even a man who was Portuguese, a dancer, very, very well-known dancer, who changed his name to sound Chinese so he could perform in the chop suey circuit.
I think the war just breaks out and then causes the problem. So either you are Chinese people or Japanese people, they have to identify to avoid, avoid the problem. So you also use a lot of Chinese saying in this book. So what is the important one, do you think? Which one
is the most important? It's a phrase or a saying attributed to Buddha. We don't know for sure if it is, but he said it. What is it? It's only three things cannot be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And so actually the novel is divided into three sections: the sun, the moon, and the truth. So the sun, when everything is out and so bright; the moon, maybe those things that are a little darker, and then finally the truth, that no matter how much you try to keep a secret, eventually it's going to come out. Flower Peony, Shanghai Girls' Dreams of Joy, China Dolls, actually 6th New York Times bestseller.
Wow, okay. You said, I try to bring what I know from both cultures into my work. The American side of me tries to open the window to China and things Chinese for non-Chinese, while the Chinese side of me makes sure what I'm writing is true to the Chinese culture without making seem too foreign. What I want people to get from my books is that all people on the planet share a common life experience, and they are universals. The difference are just culture and customers. I think it's really true. Also true for my program, Window to China. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.